The Associated Press tonight has dueling anonymous statements from the White House in the same article. One saying that the United States has concluded that Russia knew in advance of Syria's chemical weapons attack, and the other source saying no final American determination has been made that Russia knew ahead of time that chemical weapons would be used. There is no way to know which one of those statements is true. What no one in the White House is saying, anonymously or otherwise, is that we know that Russia did not know about the chemical attack before it occurred. White House National Security Advisor H.R. McMaster sounds like he doesn't believe it is even possible that Russia did not know about the chemical attack ahead of time.
What we should do is ask Russia, how could it be, if you have advisors at that airfield, that you didn't know that the Syrian Air Force was preparing and executing a mass murder attack with chemical weapons?
That's the question that I asked on this program Friday night. How could it possibly be that Vladimir Putin did not know that his client, Bashar al-Assad, was going to use chemical weapons? Chemical weapons that Vladimir Putin had promised the world no longer existed in Syria. How could Assad dare to expose the fact that he still had chemical weapons without Vladimir Putin's permission to do that? General McMaster's question then raises another question. Why? Why would Vladimir Putin authorize the use of chemical weapons in Syria? Why would President Assad use chemical weapons when he was doing a perfectly good job of killing people, bombing hospitals, killing babies without chemical weapons? Another vitally important question is, did the Trump administration do anything to indicate to President Assad and President Putin that they were so intent on not intervening in Syria in any way that Putin and Assad could get away with anything? A week before the attacks, Rex Tillerson was saying that President Assad's future should be decided by the Syrian people.
Are you worried at all that that was taken as a green light by Assad to launch that chemical attack?
George, I don't see how that could be the case. You know, this is not the first chemical attack launched by Assad. In fact, there were 2 other chemical attacks. So this was just the latest in a series of violations.
The other 2 attacks were minor compared to last week's attack, and they occurred before Rex Tillerson publicly said that, in effect, he had no problem with anything Assad was doing in Syria.
President Assad, should he stay or should he go?
I think the status and the longer term status of President Assad will be decided by the Syrian people.
Senator John McCain believes that saying things like that was a deadly mistake.
Do you think the administration did anything to encourage this behavior by the Syrians by saying that the Syrian people would determine Assad's fate and that removing him is not a priority, things that were said before the use of chemical weapons?
I think it probably was partially to blame, and Secretary Tillerson basically saying the same thing after kind of contradicting himself and then saying the same thing argues vigorously for a plan and a strategy.
So how does the Trump administration really feel about regime change in Syria?
Regime change is something that we think is going to happen because all of the parties are going to see that Assad's not the leader that needs to be taking place for Syria.
In no way do we see peace in that area with Assad as the head of the Syrian government.
And so tonight, the Trump doctrine of foreign policy is finally clear. It was enunciated today by Secretary of State Rex Tillerson in Italy and Sean Spicer at the White House.
And we rededicate ourselves to holding to account any and all who commit crimes against the innocents anywhere in the world.
And we're not just going to become the world's policemen running around the country, running around the world, but that we have to have a clear and defined national interest wherever we act, and that it's our national security first and foremost that has to deal with how we act.
Joining us now, Steve Clemons, editor-at-large at The Atlantic and an MSNBC contributor. Also with us, Malcolm Nance, MSNBC counterterrorism and intelligence analyst, and Joan Walsh, national affairs correspondent at The Nation and an MSNBC political analyst. Malcolm, first to you on the question of what did Vladimir Putin know and when did he know it. Do you share General McMaster's feeling that it seems to him very, very hard to believe that Assad would have used chemical weapons without Putin knowing it ahead of time?
Yes, I share his point of view, and there's a reason that I do so. Principally because Shirat Airfield is a very small airfield. It has 2 runways. It has 25, hardened revetments. When you use a chemical weapon and you put it onto an aircraft, you actually have to do very special handling. You have to have decontamination units that follow the aircraft. Everybody has to be wearing gas masks. You do not want to be on the flight line if one of these things exposes, right? So the Russians would see all of this coming from the arsenal, move onto the aircraft, go to a special handling area, use special aircraft controls for it to take off, and then fly off onto its target and deliver it. There is no way Russia could not have known that. Also, we may have intelligence that comes from the ground on that base from the Syrian level that indicates that they were either operating with the Russians, maybe the Russians were operating the decon units, decontamination units, but there is just no way. We probably have very good intelligence, and I'm certain that comes from the McMaster side. The political side is saying we don't know. So I'm going to go with the McMaster camp on this one.
Steve Clemons, if you go to the spot where Vladimir Putin was aware of the chemical weapon attack ahead of time, told Assad it was okay, in effect, both of those men, Putin and Assad, had to think, then what? Then what happens? What does the United States do? What does President Trump do?
I think Vladimir Putin had, if he knew, and we're speculating here, but if he knew, he had one of 2 things on his mind. One was to test the Trump administration. I think there are a lot of players out in the world that want to test the Trump administration and see what he'll do, or to change the conversation in the United States. And that gets very creepy if you go down that road. But I think that to some degree, I agree with everything Malcolm said, but perhaps more fervently, Syria is a wholly owned Russian, subsidiary. Nothing happens in that country without Vladimir Putin really signing off and knowing. And, Assad doing what he did is an embarrassment to Russia if Russia were in fact concerned with the notion that they were supposed to have rid Syria of all of its chemical weapons. So in my view, Putin was either changing the conversation here in this country on the Russia investigation of things, or he was testing Trump. And that takes it down this course, because if you look at the attack that we made with those Tomahawk missiles, it was a polite attack. We didn't crater the runway. We used excuses of the cost of the Tomahawk missiles as an excuse for that. We made sure that most everyone was out of the way. It was a polite attack. It was a pinprick. And so if it was, in fact, supposed to be a deterring effect to preempt any further use of chemical weapons or the kinds of assaults against civilians that Bashar al-Assad was launching, then I think it was a failure. And so we're left with this conundrum.
And Joan, everything Steve just said, I was raising Friday night on this program.
I saw.
And the next day, the Washington Post was absolutely outraged that the question could even be asked. They did this story, I don't know if it was in the print edition, but online, saying that I was advancing a conspiracy theory when I was asking a conspiracy question, which is a different thing. Steve just took a stronger position on it than I did. So, Steve, I'm warning you.
I speculated. I was saying it's speculation.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
But the Washington Post is coming to get you because
be careful. I'm
apparently,
not saying that happened.
I understand. But apparently, as of Saturday morning, the Washington Post and others in the media were not even slightly interested in the question of that General McMaster raised. Without him raising it, I'm not sure anybody would have gotten into the question of what did Vladimir Putin know in advance of this attack. And I have to say, from the start, as I was watching the attack, it was inconceivable to me that Vladimir Putin would not know before Assad did this, which then raises that question of motivation. And I think the lines that Steve just drew, the hypothetical lines from that motivation, made perfect sense.
They do. I mean,
tragic sense.
Tragic sense, and we are speculating. But otherwise, this makes no sense, Lawrence.
Yes, that's your alternative.
This makes no sense. The facts that we have, putting them together, it makes no sense. It's not an airstrike. It was like a Facebook poke back in the old days. They could use the airstrip within 36 hours. They are already using it. We don't know if our policy has changed. Nikki Haley says one thing. Yes, we've got to get him out. And Rex Tillerson says something very different, says the policy hasn't changed, then says we are going to go around the world protecting people in this last clip you showed, which I hadn't even seen.
Yeah, it's stunning. Yeah, Steve, to that point, Rex Tillerson today saying that we rededicate ourselves to basically to rededicating ourselves to holding to account any and all who commit crimes against innocence anywhere in the world. And then Sean Spicer says we're not going to be the policeman of the world.
No, I mean, you know, in a certain sense, the explanation that Putin is testing this White House could very well be true, because you're seeing such odd, strange, conflicting behavior and comments from people around Donald Trump. And you're seeing people like H.R. McMaster really rise. You're seeing Nikki Haley as the Secretary of State we ought to have, and Rex Tillerson perhaps should be sent to another, embassy near Singapore. I mean, it's one of these things when you sort of look at the demeanor and the posture, the comments from those around the president. It's clearly not being scripted. McMaster is asking exactly the right questions. He's putting forth exactly the right things, and you see an independence of mind and critical thinking and asking all the right things. So I'm heartened by that. I'm heartened by Nikki Haley and how she's done this. But I'm not, I have to say, Tillerson to some degree, and he's going to be in Moscow, right? He's going to be talking to Vladimir Putin, which is another odd moment in all this. It is bizarre.
Yeah, it's as if they were basically being given oral exams about foreign policy, and Tillerson is just picking, questions out of multiple choice possibilities. Malcolm, what have the Russians learned about the Trump administration? What did Assad learn about the Trump administration last week?
Well, I'll tell you, they've gotten a lesson in futility out of this administration. That cruise missile attack, and I've taken part in attacks. I've taken part in attack planning. We fired off the missiles. We hit the targets we aimed at. It was the targets that we aimed at had zero effect to disable or destroy that airbase. It had zero effect in killing or injuring any of the handling crews that actually affected that weapons attack. And it did not kill anybody related to the launch and recovery of those aircraft. That's a mission failure. If you planned it that way, you planned for failure. Oh, finally, one other thing. We did not strike the chemical weapons. We didn't use any of the weapon systems we have in our inventory designed to destroy and consume chemical weapons with thermobaric effect. We didn't even try that. So the effect of that was to show that we have the ability to launch cruise missiles, which is ridiculous because we've launched thousands of cruise missiles in the last 15 years. But for the Russians and the Syrians, they see that Trump is just not playing serious. And one other thing, if I could just make one last point. When the Syrians launched that chemical weapons strike using an aircraft, what did they intend to do other than to project a message to the Trump administration, via the Russians also, that they have chemical weapons? It had no tactical effect on the ground. It just killed civilians. They could have done that with regular bombs. That's a strategic decision made by Assad, and Assad can't make that decision without Vladimir Putin. They coordinated it, they tested it, and then Trump responds by warning them that he was going to attack, letting them get off the base and not doing anything other than breaking up some concrete revetments. Mission failure.
And at the end of all of that, Donald Trump comes out on the right end of a poll. Washington Post, ABC News poll, do you support President Trump's missile strike in Syria? 51% support, 40% oppose. And Joan Walsh, when you're writing the full story, that is one of the spots where it ends, is that Donald Trump was able to do something that the polls responded to in a positive way.
And that, you know, pundits responded to, for not all of us, but many of us, in a positive way. Even some Democrats responded to it in a positive way. It's like there was this pent-up demand. Barack Obama didn't do it. People were happy to see him do it, even though it makes no sense and there's absolutely no strategy, apparent strategy behind it. But people have such a low bar now and seem to be invested in Donald Trump either making a pivot or appearing presidential, that simply when he does a thing that other presidents have done, like using missiles, he becomes presidential. The real presidential thing, in my opinion, is often restraint, and would have been in this case. But his poll, you know, he's got good poll numbers. That's great.
We're going to have to work in a break here. Steve Clemons, thank you very much for joining us
Thank
tonight.
you.
And Steve, let's just double underline, you were not asserting facts or in your first answer tonight. You were taking motivations and saying, here's a logic set to apply to these possible motivations. We have to clarify that because
thank you, Lawrence, for making that absolutely clear.
Apparently not all of our viewers in the press get that. Thank you, Steve.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.